You might laugh, I told you the Romans had the internet. They had something strangely similar. It also had about a dozen other technologies that make our fancy devices seem kind of basic. What's really surprising is that we actually went backwards in ways after our own fall. Are you ready to feel a little silly about thinking we lived in the most advanced time ever? Let's see what cool stuff we actually lost. When the Romans wanted fresh water in their cities, they didn't just dig a well and hope it worked out. They created some of the most amazing engineering projects anyone had ever seen. They built aqueducts that moved water across great distances using nothing but gravity and their own cleverness. These weren't like regular garden hoses. They were stone and brick channels that went on for over 50 miles, crossing valleys and going over hill-hook engine highways for water. The Romans even made their own waterproof cement that was so good, it's better than some of the concrete we use now. They didn't have electric pumps or any complicated machines, just simple physics and a lot of determination. The crazy thing is, they were able to get water up to buildings with multiple floors, fill huge public baths, and provide water for tons of fountains all over their cities. And they did all of this almost 2,000 years ago, when most other people were still trying to figure out how basic plumbing worked. It took a lot of accuracy to do this right. If the slope was off by just a little bit, the whole thing would break. But the Romans didn't just build these things to last a few years. They built them to last forever. Some of these aqueducts are still working today, bringing water just like they did when the first engineers turned them on. That's 2,000 years of working consistently without any software updates or needing someone to come fix them. The math needed to build these water highways would make some modern engineers nervous. Every arch, every slope, every turn had to be perfect. It makes you wonder what else they figured out that we are still trying to do today. And speaking of things that last a long time, the Romans didn't just focus on bringing clean water in. They also had to figure out how to get the dirty water out. While the aqueducts brought clean water to Rome, someone had to figure out how to get rid of all the dirty water. That's where the cloaca maxima comes in. It sounds fancy, but it was basically just a giant drain. This sewer system was one of the most important parts of Rome, even if people didn't want to talk about it at dinner. It was built around the 6th century BC, storing a simple ditch to keep the foreign from turning into a swamp. Because they were Romans, it made it bare. It turned it into a huge system of stone tunnels that could handle rainwater and waste from all over the city. The main tunnel was so big, you could actually row a boat through it. Some of these tunnels were 12 feet wide and over 10 feet tall. Workers built them in huge stone blocks that fit together without any water. This made arches that spread the weight perfectly. The engineering was so well done that parts of it still work today, almost 2,000 years later. What's really cool is that this system stopped floods and disease, which were common problems in other ancient cities. When it rained a lot in Rome, the water had somewhere to go instead of flooding streets and houses. And the waste is carried away from where people live instead of sitting in the heat. The cloaca maxima emptied into the Tiber River, which wasn't great for the people who lived downstream, but it kept Rome itself pretty clean. This huge drainage system became a model for city sanitation all over the empire-inspired modern city plan. But today, war and cozy need other inventions that work underground in a completely different way. After the Romans built aqueducts to bring water into the city, they had another problem. How do you keep everyone warm during the cold times of the year? Well, they came up with something that would make modern people jealous. The aqueduct system is like ancient central heating, but even cooler than what you have at home. The Romans knew how to heat entire buildings using just fire, stone, and good engineering. They didn't need electric farms, gas furnaces, or confusing thermosimes. Here's how it worked. They would build a furnace outside the building and burn wood or charcoal in it. The hot air and smoke would go through channels built into the walls and under the floors. The floors are raised up on small stone pillars, which create a space where the hot air could flow. This sealed the floors, which then warmed roofs above, turning cold stone buildings into comfortable places to live. But the Romans didn't stop there. They also built channels inside the walls, which allowed hot air to rise and warm multiple floors. The whole system worked using a natural flow of hot air. No pumps, no electricity, just physics doing its job. Roman bathhouses used aqueducts to create different temperatures. You could go from a cooler to hotter rooms, just like a spa today. Some rich Romans even had aqueducts in their own homes. This was basically like having a luxury heating system back then. Some hyper-cost systems in Europe still work today, almost 2,000 years later. That's how well the Romans built things. Speaking of how long Roman things last, you should hear about how they used flowing water to power businesses. The Romans were great at bringing water where they needed it with their aqueducts, but they also learned how to use that water to do work. That's where water wheels came in. They were like the ancient version of free labor that never complained or needed a break. These were small backyard water wheels. Roman engineers built wooden ones that could be 20 feet tall and put them in rivers and streams. The idea was simple. The water would hit the paddles, which would turn the wheel. That turning motion could then be used to power things. The smartest part was how they designed the wheels. Undershot was set partly in the water and were pushed by the current. But the Romans also made overshot wheels that received water from above. By using both the weight and the flow of the water, these wheels were super efficient. Some of them could reach 70% efficiency, which is better than some machines today. What did they power? They powered green mills, which ground wheat into flour to make bread for entire cities. They also powered sawmills that cut wood for building projects. Other wheels powered hammers for metalworking and machined for crushing ores into oil. They did all of this without burning any coal or using any power. Using these wheels took serious math skills. The Romans had to figure out water flow rates, gear ratios, and how to transmit power. They basically created the first industrial areas along rivers. Sundials ran constantly for years, only needing a little bit of forcing every once in a while. But water wheels were more than just machines. They showed how the Romans thought about power. They found ways to use natural forces to do work. This way thinking inspired mills in the medieval times and even modern hydroelectric dams. And speaking of Roman things that lasted, their concrete was so good that it makes today's construction temporary. The Romans built great aqueducts and sewers, but their secret weapon was the material that held everything together. Roman concrete wasn't just another building material. It was like an ancient superglue that stood the test of time. Here's what's interesting. Most people think concrete is just concrete, right? Well, the Romans found out something engineers are still trying to figure out. They mixed lime, volcanic ash from Mount Vesuvius. This made a chemical reaction that got stronger over time, especially underwater. The strange thing is that while our concrete starts to break down after 50 years, Roman concrete has been sitting in seawater for 2,000 years and is still solid. The Romans didn't have cement trucks or electric mixers. They mixed volcanic ash with lime, water, and pieces of stone using just their own strength and wooden tools. But the secret was in the ash. When seawater touched Roman concrete, it started a process that built tiny crystals inside the mix. It's basically huge egg cracks that tried to form. Its concrete is so strong that the Romans could build big domes like the Pantheon, which still has the largest unreinforced concrete dome in the world. It built harbors that survived many storms or earthquakes. Several bridges are still used today, supporting cars and trucks that the builders never could have imagined. Scientists have spent years trying to make this concrete again, but volcanic ash from Vesuvius isn't easy to get. The Romans had found a way to build things that would last forever, and they used it to build an empire that still stands today. In talking about building things that last, the Romans didn't just make good concrete. They also knew it would dig through solid rock to change the land. When the Romans wanted to turn a swampy lake into a farm, they didn't just complain about it. They grabbed their tools and started digging tunnels that would make modern engineers nervous. The Fucine Lake project is one of their most impressive things. Imagine big lake in central Italy flooding farmland. The Romans started to drain the entire lake. Their plans did tunnel over 3.5 miles long, straight through Modena. They didn't have GPS, lasers, or any fancy equipment. They used basic math, wooden measuring sticks, and their own intelligence to dig from both sides of the mountain at the same time. When the two groups met in the middle, they were only a few feet off. That's amazing accuracy using just hand tools and torches. The engineering was tough. Workers had to deal with cave-ins, floods, and bad air. They made ventilation shafts, wind supports, and ways to drink water to keep the project going for over 10 years. It also took a lot of people to do it. Thousands of workers, many of them prisoners and slaves, chipped away at the rock with hammers and chisels. They didn't have dynamite or drills, just their own hard work and problem-solving skills. What's amazing is that these tunnel-building skills spread throughout the empire. The Romans used similar methods to drain mines, build underground parts of aqueducts, and make paths through hills. The skills they learned became the basis for underground construction for centuries. And speaking of building things that last, the Romans had another trick to save space that changed how people moved around in tall buildings. Have you ever tried walking up a normal staircase in an old tower? You might hit your head or feel like you're going to fall. The Romans figured this out and came up with a great idea: spiral staircases that twisted upward like a tornado made of stone. These weren't just pretty. They fixed a big problem that had bothered builders for years. Normal staircases took up a lot of floor space, which was valuable in crowded Roman cities. If you route the stick around a center post and spiral, you can move people up without wasting space. The engineering was tricky. Each stone stack had to be carved at the right angle and depth. If it was too steep, people would fall. If it was too shallow, a staircase would take up too much space. Roman workers calculated the perfect size for each step, making comfortable staircases that could handle a lot of people every day. Trajan's column is a great example of this technology. Inside the tall monument, a spiral staircase goes up through the center, letting people go to the top without any outside support. The steps are smooth from almost 2,000 years of use, but they still worked. There's also defense advantage that people don't talk about. Castle builders later found out that spiral staircases helped defenders during attacks. Enemies climbing up had their sword arms against the center post, while defenders above could swing freely. The Romans probably knew this trick long before knights used it. But the Romans weren't just good at building. They also learned how to make human strength go further using simple machines. This changed how fur was made across the empire. Going from spiral staircases to kitchen inventions might seem strange, but the Romans wanted to make everything better, including how they made food. Have you ever tried squeezing grapes by hand? Your fingers hurt after a few grapes, and you only get juice. Now, imagine eating thousands of grapes for wine all over the empire. The Romans had great solution. It didn't need any fancy machines or power. The screw press changed everything. This wasn't complicated. It was just a big wooden screw workers could turn to create a lot of pressure. It's like the ancient version of a hydraulic press, powered by people and smart engineering. The screw made force much stronger. One person turning cash grates with the power of many people stomping on them. The Romans used sanity to make olive oil, which was important because it was used for food, soap, lamp oil, and medicine. The beauty was how simple it was. A wooden frame, a mouse screw, and a heavy plate on top. Workers put grapes or olives into a basket, and a press, and start turning. A turning motion slowly lowered the plate, squeezing and a drop of liquid. Some wineries still use screw presses today, almost 2,000 years later. That shows how well they work. The Romans made something so good that people haven't needed to change it much. But crushing grapes was just one part of Roman life. They also needed to know when to pick the grapes, which meant keeping track of time. Have you ever wondered what time it was while traveling in ancient Rome? Well, the Romans had something for that too. They made portable sundials that could fit in their pocket. These weren't just random pieces of metal with lines on them. Roman engineers did the math to make them work right. They figured out angles for different times of the year and even changed them for different cities. That's some serious math without a calculator. The basic idea was simple. You put a small round upright, and the candle it made will show the time. That the Romans made different kinds for different places. A sundial that worked in Rome might be wrong in Britain, so they had to make each one differently. Some of these pocket sundials were tiny works of art. Crafters carved designs around the time marks, making a tool that was also beautiful. Rich Romans liked to show off their sundials at parties. A smart part was that they didn't have parts that could break, or batteries that could die, and they lasted for years. You just needed the sun, which was usually there in the Mediterranean. Sure, cloudy days were a problem, but it was better than not knowing the time at all when you were far from a public clock. These little devices spread throughout the Roman world, helping merchants, soldiers, and travelers stay on time. And some of these ancient sundials were more accurate than the first clocks that came later. And speaking of staying comfortable during travel, the Romans had another great idea. While the Romans had great heated buildings with aqueducts, they also found something amazing. Why not heat a whole bathhouse? These weren't just regular pools. They are huge social places that hold thousands of Romans at once, without any heaters or pumps. The ideal is to use their hypocost technology with water from the aqueducts. Hot air went through channels, warming the floors and walls of the bath halls. The Romans made different temperature areas, with hot pools, warm areas, and cold pools. They even had steam rooms. These were heated by the same underground furnace system. But these bathhouses weren't just for getting clean. They were also where people socialized. People came to talk, make deals, exercise, and show off. Senators relaxed next to regular people, making a surprisingly equal place in a society that wasn't always equal. The engineering was simple but effective. Sage put into furnaces, heating air that went through channels under the floors. Water flowed from aqueducts, was heated by the system, and then drained away for sewers. There is no power, no machines, just smart use of heat, gravity, and water flow. Some of these bathhouses were huge. The baths of Caracalla could hold over 1,600 people at once, covering 27 acres. The whole place had libraries, gardens, and exercise spots, making it more like a spa than just a bath. While the Romans were changing public bathing, they were also making another thing perfect: pottery. Their pottery was so strong that it still amazes people today. When the Romans wanted fancy dishes, they didn't just use any clay pot. They made something called Samian ware. This pottery was so shiny and perfect that it made other dishes look like mud. It wasn't just regular pottery. It was so strong that it could be buried for 2,000 years and still look great when people dug it up. The secret was that the Romans were obsessed with doing things right. They mixed minerals into their clay and then fired it at high temperatures. They didn't have electric chills or controls, just skilled workers who knew when the heat was right. This made glossy red finished dough smooth and shiny. This pottery wasn't just pretty, it was also tough. Roman families used these dishes every day, and then lasted longer than most plates today. If you dropped one of our plates today, you might cry. If you dropped ramen Samian ware, it might not even break. The Romans were proud of this pottery, and they traded it all over their empire. From Britain to Egypt, people wanted that red color on their tables. People can see where the Romans traded by finding pieces of broken pottery. Quality goods travel far. The pottery shops had workers who stamped patterns into the clay before firing. Each piece was basically art that you could eat off of. Speaking of Roman things that moved smoothly, their engineers also found ways to reduce friction. People today would be impressed. Have you ever wondered how the Romans built ships that could carry hundreds of people that barbarians? Well, they made their own version. They found that really is better than sliding. The Romans made all berries from wooden rods. These simple materials solve the big problem. When you're trying to move something heavy, friction is your enemy. The Romans were smart. Instead of dragging heavy things, they made them roll on pieces. Lake Nemi had 2 ships that were like palaces for the Emperor Caligula. They were just fishing boats. They were over 200 feet long. The Romans used roller bearings in the steering and winches of these ships. It makes sense because when you're turning something as heavy as a small house, you need all the help you can get. The engineers also placed roller systems in cranes, doors, and lifting tools all over the empire. They found out something that took people years to learn. Reducing friction makes things easier. The bronze rollers were placed between moving parts, like the ball bearings in your car wheels today. It didn't need any power, just smart engineering and good materials. Some of these bearings were found in shipwrecks. They were still smooth after 2,000 years underwater. This simple idea became a base for almost every machine you use today. Your bike, your car, and your chair all use the same idea that Roman shipbuilders used so long ago. Sometimes the best solutions are really simple.